For 30 years, Johnny Carson transformed The Tonight Show into America's nightly gathering place, where Hollywood's biggest stars came to shine. While Carson could handle any guest with professional grace, certain Golden Age legends brought out genuine joy in the usually reserved host. These weren't just successful interviews. They were magical moments where Carson's eyes lit up and his famous laugh became completely unguarded. If you want to see more behind-the-scenes stories from television's golden era, hit that subscribe button now because we're revealing Carson's most treasured guests. From comedy pioneers who could match his wit to classical Hollywood stars who shared his Midwestern values, these 10 performers represented everything Carson loved about show business. Here are the Golden Age guests that Johnny Carson absolutely adored having on The Tonight Show. Jack Benny, the legendary comedian who perfected the art of comedic timing, held a special place in Johnny Carson's heart as both a mentor and the gold standard for television comedy. Carson's face would transform whenever Benny appeared, shifting from professional host to eager student watching the master at work. Their relationship transcended the typical host-guest dynamic, representing a passing of the torch between two generations of comedy royalty. Carson had idolized Benny since his radio days, studying his pauses, his ability to get laughs from silence, and his mastery of the slow burn. When Benny appeared on The Tonight Show, Carson would noticeably defer to him, allowing the elder comedian to control the pace and rhythm of the interview. Staff members recalled that Carson would actually rehearse his questions more carefully for Benny than any other guest, wanting to set up the perfect launching pad for Benny's legendary timing. What made their on-screen chemistry magical was Benny's ability to make Carson corpse with laughter, something few guests could achieve. During one memorable appearance, Benny told a story about his famous stinginess with such perfect deadpan delivery that Carson had to wipe tears from his eyes and apologize to the audience for losing his composure. Benny sat there with his trademark hand-to-cheek pose, pretending to be offended by Carson's laughter, which only made Carson laugh harder. Behind the scenes, Benny served as Carson's unofficial advisor during his early Tonight Show years. When Carson faced criticism or difficult decisions, he'd often call Benny for guidance. Benny taught Carson that the real secret to longevity wasn't just being funny, but knowing when to let others shine. This lesson became fundamental to Carson's hosting philosophy. The most poignant moment came during what would be Benny's final Tonight Show appearance in 1974, just months before his death. Carson abandoned his usual format and simply let Benny talk, knowing somehow this would be their last conversation on television. At the end, Carson broke protocol by standing and embracing Benny, whispering something that made the older comedian's eyes water. Years later, Carson would cite Benny as his greatest influence, keeping a photo from that final appearance on his office wall until his own retirement. "Jack taught me that comedy is about generosity," Carson once said. "The biggest laughs come when you give them away to someone else." James Stewart, the quintessential American everyman, brought out a warmth in Johnny Carson that viewers rarely witnessed with other guests. Their connection ran deeper than Hollywood charm. It was rooted in shared Midwestern values and a mutual understanding of authenticity in an industry built on artifice. When Stewart appeared on The Tonight Show, Carson's carefully maintained professional distance would melt away, replaced by genuine affection for a man he considered the most decent person in Hollywood. Carson's admiration for Stewart went beyond his acting abilities. Both men had served in World War II, Stewart as a decorated bomber pilot and Carson in the Navy, creating an unspoken bond that colored their conversations. They could communicate volumes with a single glance when discussing their generation's experiences, understanding the weight of what went unsaid. During commercial breaks, they'd often continue talking about aviation, with Carson hanging on Stewart's stories about flying B-24 Liberators over Germany. What made their interviews special was Stewart's ability to bring out Carson's rarely seen sentimental side. The stammering, humble persona that Stewart perfected on screen was no act. He genuinely was that thoughtful and self-deprecating in person. This authenticity disarmed Carson completely. During one appearance, Stewart told a story about his father's hardware store in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Carson surprised everyone by sharing his own memories of his grandfather's Iowa farm, something he almost never did on air. The chemistry between them was built on mutual respect and similar philosophies about fame. Neither man was comfortable with Hollywood excess, both preferred quiet family lives, and both viewed their success with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. Stewart would often deflect praise by crediting his directors and co-stars, which Carson found refreshing after dealing with endless ego-driven guests. Their most memorable moment came during Stewart's appearance promoting his last Western. Carson abandoned his prepared questions and simply asked Stewart to talk about what Westerns meant to America. Stewart's thoughtful, philosophical response about frontier values and American character had Carson leaning forward, completely absorbed. The studio audience sat in unusual silence, sensing they were witnessing something deeper than typical talk show banner. Behind the scenes, Carson would clear his schedule whenever Stewart was booked, arriving early to personally greet him. After Stewart's appearances, Carson would often tell his staff, "That's how you conduct yourself in this business." When Stewart passed away in 1997, Carson, though retired, released a rare public statement calling him the finest man I ever had the privilege to interview. Their friendship represented everything Carson valued: dignity, humility, and the increasingly rare quality of being genuine in a world of manufactured personalities. George Burns, the cigar-wielding comedy legend who seemed to grow funnier with age, transformed Johnny Carson from composed host to delighted fan every time he shuffled onto the Tonight Show stage. Their relationship was built on mutual admiration and a shared understanding of comedy's deepest secrets, with Burns representing the living history of American entertainment that Carson revered. When Burns appeared, Carson would lean back in his chair with an expression of pure contentment, knowing he was about to witness masterclass after masterclass in comedic timing. Burns had a unique ability to make Carson break his own rules. The host, who carefully controlled every segment, would let Burns ramble through stories that went nowhere, smoke his cigar despite NBC regulations, and completely derail the interview schedule. Carson didn't care because Burns's mere presence elevated the show. During one appearance, Burns spent 10 minutes setting up a joke about his brother, forgot the punchline, then got a massive laugh by admitting he'd forgotten it. Carson was doubled over, later calling it the funniest moment in Tonight Show history. What Carson treasured most was Burns's perspective on show business longevity. Having performed in vaudeville, radio, television, and film, Burns embodied the evolution of American comedy. He'd worked with everyone from Charlie Chaplin to John Wayne, and Carson would become almost childlike, asking about legends he'd only read about. Burns would oblige with stories that were simultaneously hilarious and historically invaluable, creating Tonight Show segments that were essentially oral histories of entertainment. Their chemistry peaked during Carson's anniversary shows, where Burns would appear to roast Carson with such affection that insults became compliments. "Johnny's been on the air so long, his first sponsor was fire," Burns would say, then wink at Carson, who'd be fighting back laughter. These moments revealed their genuine friendship, built on respect for the craft they both served. Behind the scenes, Burns became Carson's touchstone for perspective during difficult times. When Carson went through his divorces or contract disputes, Burns would remind him that show business is 2 words, and the second one is more important. This wisdom helped Carson navigate his darkest moments. The most touching moment came during Burns' appearance on his 95th birthday. Carson surprised him with a cake, and Burns, usually unflappable, seemed genuinely moved. "Johnny," he said, "when I started in show business, I never imagined I'd live long enough to be considered a good performer, let alone be celebrated by the best. Carson's eyes visibly misted, a rare display of emotion from the controlled host. Lucille Ball, the queen of physical comedy and television's first female mogul, brought out a playful side in Johnny Carson that viewers cherished whenever she graced The Tonight Show. Their chemistry was electric, built on mutual respect between two pioneers who understood the machinery of television better than almost anyone alive. When Lucy entered, Carson would practically bounce in his chair, knowing he was about to share the stage with someone who could match him, beat for beat in both comedy and business acumen. Carson's admiration for Ball went beyond her comedic genius to her groundbreaking role as a female executive in a male-dominated industry. He'd often steer conversations toward her business insights, genuinely fascinated by how she'd built Desilu Productions into a powerhouse that gave the world Star Trek and Mission Impossible. Ball appreciated this recognition of her business prowess, as too many interviewers only wanted to hear about Lucy Ricardo's antics. Their on-screen magic came from Ball's ability to surprise Carson with perfectly timed physical comedy even while seated. During one legendary appearance, she demonstrated how she'd learned to cry on cue by actually producing tears while describing the technique, then immediately switching to laughter when Carson pretended to console her. The audience went wild as Carson threw his cards in the air, surrendering to her comic genius. What made their relationship special was their shared understanding of television's unique demands. Both had transitioned from radio to TV, mastering the visual medium when many of their contemporaries failed. They'd exchange knowing glances when discussing the technical aspects of production, understanding each other's challenges in ways few others could. Ball would often share production disasters from I Love Lucy that had Carson wiping tears of laughter, especially her stories about working with Vivian Vance and William Frawley's ongoing feud. Behind the scenes, Carson treated Ball with unusual deference. He'd personally check her dressing room setup and ensure she had her preferred brand of cigarettes, though she'd quit years earlier. It was his way of showing respect for someone he considered television royalty. Ball reciprocated by always bringing Carson gifts from her travels, usually something absurd that would make him laugh. Their most poignant moment came during Ball's final Tonight Show appearance in 1988. Carson abandoned his usual format to show clips from her entire career, not just Lucy, but her dramatic roles and business achievements. Ball, typically sharp and witty, seemed genuinely overwhelmed. "Johnny," she said, "you've always seen me as more than just Lucy. That means everything." It was a rare moment of vulnerability from two titans who'd spent their careers making others laugh. Dean Martin, the effortlessly cool crooner who perfected the art of relaxed charm, shared a special chemistry with Johnny Carson that went beyond their Rat Pack connection. Their relationship was built on a mutual understanding of the power of understatement, with both men knowing that the biggest laughs often came from the smallest gestures. When Martin would stroll onto the Tonight Show stage with his signature loose walk and casual demeanor, Carson would visibly relax, knowing he was about to engage with someone who understood that hosting, like performing, was about making it look easy. What made their interactions magical was Martin's ability to puncture Hollywood pretension with Carson's full approval. Dean would arrive with a drink in hand, usually apple juice disguised as scotch, play up his drunk persona, then deliver perfectly timed zingers that revealed his razor-sharp mind. Carson loved being in on the joke, often setting up Dean's confusion with straight-man precision. During one classic appearance, Martin pretended not to know what show he was on, asking, "Is this Merv Griffin?" The bit killed because Carson played along perfectly, fake insulted, but clearly delighted. Their shared history gave their conversations depth beyond typical celebrity interviews. Both had come up through nightclubs, both understood the grind of constant performing, and both had learned to hide their serious sides behind carefully crafted personas. When Martin occasionally dropped his drunk act to discuss his son Dean Paul's military service, or his thoughts on the changing entertainment industry, Carson would lean in, recognizing these rare moments of genuine revelation. Behind the scenes, their friendship was built on mutual professional respect. Martin appreciated that Carson never pushed him to be on when he wasn't feeling it, while Carson valued Martin's ability to save any segment with a perfectly timed quip. Staff members recalled that Carson would often keep Martin's appearances loose, throwing out prepared questions to let their natural chemistry drive the conversation. Their most memorable moment came during Martin's surprise appearance at Carson's anniversary show. Dean walked out unannounced, singing "Everybody Loves Somebody" with altered lyrics about Johnny. Carson, who hated surprises and maintained strict control over his show, was genuinely touched. The two embraced, and Martin whispered something that made Carson laugh and tear up simultaneously. Years after Martin's death, Carson would occasionally reference their friendship, calling Dean the most naturally funny man I ever met. Their easy rapport represented everything Carson loved about show business, the ability to entertain while never letting them see you sweat. Bette Davis, the fierce and uncompromising queen of dramatic cinema, brought out an intellectual vigor in Johnny Carson that elevated The Tonight Show into something approaching salon conversation. Their encounters crackled with electricity as two sharp minds engaged in verbal fencing matches that Carson relished more than any other guest appearances. When Davis would sweep onto the stage with her imperious bearing and cigarette holder, Carson would sit up straighter, knowing he needed to bring his absolute A-game to keep pace with Hollywood's most formidable personality. Carson's fascination with Davis went beyond her legendary career to her absolute refusal to play Hollywood's games. She'd answer his questions with brutal honesty that would have made publicists faint, discussing her feuds, failed marriages, and professional disappointments with a candor that both thrilled and occasionally terrified Carson. During one memorable appearance, she dismissed half of modern Hollywood as pretty faces with nothing behind the eyes. And Carson, instead of deflecting, leaned in and asked her to name names. What made their chemistry exceptional was Davis's ability to challenge Carson intellectually while respecting his position as host. She'd engage him in debates about acting theory, the decline of studio systems, and the coarsening of American culture, treating him as an equal rather than just another interviewer. Carson would prepare for Davis' appearances by actually watching her recent films and reading her interviews, wanting to engage with her on a substantive level. Their most electric moments came when Davis would turn the tables and interview Carson. She'd demand to know his opinions on everything from method acting to women's liberation, refusing to accept his diplomatic deflections. "Don't be a politician, Johnny," she'd snap. "Tell me what you really think." These exchanges revealed a Carson rarely seen, one willing to express actual opinions rather than hiding behind wit. Behind the scenes, Carson both adored and feared Davis. He'd personally ensure her dressing room had fresh flowers and her preferred bourbon, but would also need a drink himself before her appearances. His producer, Peter LaSalle, recalled Carson saying, "Bette keeps me honest. She won't let me coast." This challenge was exactly what Carson craved from guests but rarely received. Their most poignant moment came when Davis appeared shortly after her mastectomy and stroke. Instead of hiding her struggles, she discussed them openly, and Carson abandoned his usual comedic approach to engage with her about mortality and legacy. When she said, "Growing old is not for sissies, Johnny," he replied, "Neither is talking with Bette Davis." She laughed, reached across, and patted his hand, a rare gesture of warmth that acknowledged their unique bond. Jimmy Durante, the schnozola himself with his gravelly voice and malaprop-laden speech, brought out pure, childlike joy in Johnny Carson every time he appeared on The Tonight Show. Their connection transcended generational gaps, with Durante representing vaudeville's golden era, while Carson embodied modern television's sophistication. Yet when Durante would bound onto stage with his energetic shuffle, slapping his hands together and murdering the English language with gleeful abandon, Carson would transform from polished host to delighted audience member. Carson's affection for Durante was rooted in the older entertainer's complete authenticity. There was no difference between Durante on stage and off. His warmth and self-deprecating humor were genuine, not manufactured for cameras. This realness resonated deeply with Carson, who spent his life maintaining a careful distance between his public and private personas. Durante's appearances gave Carson permission to drop his guard and simply enjoy the presence of someone who radiated pure love for performing. What made their interviews special was Durante's ability to make Carson laugh with seemingly nonsensical phrases and destroyed vocabulary that somehow communicated perfectly. "I got 1,000,000 of them," Durante would rasp after every joke, whether it landed or not, and Carson would lose it every time. During one appearance, Durante tried to explain a catastrophe, but kept calling it a catastrophe, getting more frustrated while Carson wiped tears from laughter. Finally, Durante shouted, "You know what I mean," and Carson, barely able to speak, gasped, "I have absolutely no idea, Jimmy." Their chemistry was enhanced by Durante's habit of bringing Carson into his act. He'd grab Carson's arm during stories, play his nose like a horn while staring at Carson for reactions, and frequently forget what show he was on, calling Carson Ed or Steve. Rather than correct him, Carson would play along, answering to whatever name Durante used, understanding that the magic was in Durante's uninhibited performance. Behind the scenes, Carson treated Durante with unusual tenderness. As Durante aged and his health declined, Carson would ensure shorter segments so he wouldn't tire, but edited them to appear full-length on air. He'd also have Durante's favorite foods in his dressing room and personally walk him to and from the stage. Their most touching moment came during Durante's final appearance, when he was clearly struggling with his memory. Carson gently guided him through stories, filling in gaps without making it obvious, protecting Durante's dignity while allowing him to shine one last time. When Durante ended with his signature, "Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are," Carson stood and applauded, leading the audience in an ovation that Durante deserved for a lifetime of bringing joy. Carol Burnett, the fearless comedian who revolutionized variety television, shared an extraordinary chemistry with Johnny Carson that revealed his deep respect for female comedians in an era when they were rare. Their appearances together crackled with mutual admiration and the kind of comedic trust that only exists between performers who recognize each other as equals. When Burnett would arrive on The Tonight Show, Carson's entire demeanor would shift from host to collaborator, eager to create spontaneous comedy with someone whose instincts he trusted completely. Carson's admiration for Burnett went beyond her comedy to her groundbreaking role as a woman running her own variety show. He'd often steer conversations toward the challenges she faced in a male-dominated industry, genuinely interested in her strategies for maintaining creative control. Burnett appreciated Carson's recognition of these struggles, as he was one of the few male hosts who understood that her success required twice the talent and 3 times the determination of her male counterparts. What made their on-screen partnership magical was their ability to improvise together seamlessly. During one legendary appearance, Burnett started doing her Tarzan yell unexpectedly, and without missing a beat, Carson began acting like a confused jungle animal, creating a spontaneous bit that had the audience screaming with laughter. They could communicate entire comedy concepts with just a glance, building on each other's ideas instantaneously. Their chemistry was enhanced by Carson's willingness to be the straight man to Burnett's characters. She'd often arrive in character as Eunice or Mrs. Wiggins, and Carson would play along perfectly, never trying to top her, but instead setting her up for bigger laughs. This generosity was something Burnett never forgot. later saying Carson understood that comedy was about serving the scene, not winning it. Behind the scenes, their friendship was built on shared experiences of divorce, single parenthood, and the pressure of maintaining successful shows. They'd often talk during commercial breaks about their children or the exhaustion of taping schedules, finding comfort in someone who understood their unique challenges. Their most memorable moment came when Burnett appeared on Carson's anniversary show and surprised him by bringing the entire cast of her show. They performed a sketch where Carson played a bumbling guest star on the Carol Burnett show, reversing their usual roles. Carson threw himself into the physical comedy with abandon, even doing a pratfall that left Burnett gasping with laughter. When it ended, she grabbed his face and said, "Johnny, you should have been in Variety." He replied, "I am, Carol. Every night with guests like you." The audience erupted, recognizing the genuine affection between two television titans. Don Rickles, the merchant of venom, whose entire act consisted of insulting everyone in sight, paradoxically brought out genuine warmth and affection in Johnny Carson that confused viewers who didn't understand their unique dynamic. While Rickles terrorized other talk show hosts and made audiences gasp with his brutal takedowns, his appearances with Carson revealed a deep friendship built on mutual respect and the understanding that beneath Rickles' assault was genuine love. When Rickles would storm onto the Tonight Show stage, Carson would brace himself with mock terror that barely concealed his delight. Carson's appreciation for Rickles went beyond comedy to recognize the precision and intelligence required to insult people in a way that somehow expressed affection. He understood that Rickles' gift wasn't cruelty, but the ability to find everyone's vulnerability and transform it into shared laughter. During appearances, Carson would offer himself as Rickles' primary target, knowing that the more vicious the attacks, the more the audience would understand their actual friendship. What made their segments legendary was Carson's ability to enhance Rickles' act by playing the perfect victim. He'd react with mock outrage to every insult, setting Rickles up for even bigger laughs. During one classic appearance, Rickles said Carson's new contract was like paying a fortune for yesterday's newspaper, and Carson pretended to storm off, only to return and hug Rickles while the audience roared. These moments of breaking character revealed the genuine affection beneath their routine. Their chemistry was built on professional admiration and personal loyalty. When Rickles' career hit rough patches, Carson ensured he had regular Tonight Show bookings. When Carson went through divorces, Rickles would call privately to check on him, never mentioning these kindnesses publicly. This mutual support created an unbreakable bond that transcended their on-screen personas. The most revealing moment of their friendship came during the famous cigarette box incident. When Rickles accidentally broke Carson's cigarette box while guest hosting, Carson surprised everyone by storming onto the set of Rickles' sitcom, CPO Sharkey, to confront him. The staged confrontation was comedy gold, but what viewers didn't see was Carson calling Rickles beforehand to plan the bit, wanting to help boost his friend's show ratings. Their most touching exchange came during one of Rickles' later appearances when he suddenly dropped his insult comic persona to tell Carson, "You gave me a career, Johnny. Every time I was on here, America saw I was okay, because you laughed." Carson, visibly moved, replied, "Don, you never needed my approval. You just needed a stage." It was a rare moment of sincerity between two comedians who showed love through combat. Bob Hope, the undisputed king of American comedy who entertained troops and dominated entertainment for 7 decades, shared a complex but ultimately affectionate relationship with Johnny Carson that evolved from professional obligation to genuine mutual respect. While Hope could be rigid and scripted with many hosts, Carson's unique ability to navigate Hope's ego while drawing out glimpses of the real man beneath the persona created some of The Tonight Show's most surprisingly touching moments between two comedy titans. Carson's initial frustration with Hope's over-rehearsed appearances transformed over the years into appreciation for Hope's dedication to his craft. He learned to work within Hope's structured approach, finding ways to inject spontaneity that Hope could handle. During one appearance, Carson deliberately went off script, asking Hope about a USO tour that wasn't in the prepared questions. Hope's genuine surprise led to an unguarded story about a wounded soldier that had both men visibly emotional, creating a rare moment of authentic connection. What ultimately won Carson over was recognizing Hope's deep insecurity beneath the polished exterior. The man who seemed so controlling was actually terrified of not being funny anymore. Carson began structuring Hope's appearances to guarantee success, feeding him perfect setups while making it appear natural. This generosity didn't go unnoticed by Hope, who gradually relaxed in Carson's presence, occasionally even abandoning his cue cards for brief moments of actual conversation. Their relationship deepened when Carson learned about Hope's private philanthropy and genuine devotion to veterans. Unlike his public persona, Hope's charity work was often anonymous, something that impressed Carson, who valued actions over image. During one appearance, Carson surprised Hope by bringing out a veteran Hope had privately supported through college. Hope's unscripted reaction, torn between embarrassment and pride, revealed the human being behind decades of carefully crafted image. Behind the scenes, their relationship became unexpectedly tender as Hope aged. Carson would personally ensure Hope's appearances were scheduled early when he was sharpest, and would have producers edit out any moments where Hope's age showed. This protection was Carson's way of honoring everything Hope had contributed to American comedy. Their most poignant moment came during Hope's final Tonight Show appearance. Carson abandoned the usual format to show a montage of Hope's USO tours. When it ended, Hope, clearly moved, grabbed Carson's hand and said, "Johnny, you always saw past the jokes." Carson replied, "Bob, the jokes were never the point. The joy you brought was." It was a perfect summation of their journey from awkward obligation to genuine respect, proving that even the most unlikely relationships could evolve into something meaningful. These 10 Golden Age legends represented everything Johnny Carson cherished about show business: authenticity, generosity, and the magical ability to create moments of genuine human connection through entertainment. From Jack Benny's mentorship to Bob Hope's evolution from scripted guest to treasured friend, from Lucille Ball's groundbreaking genius to Don Rickles' disguised affection, each relationship revealed Carson's deep appreciation for performers who understood that television was about more than just getting laughs. Which of Carson's beloved guests surprised you most? Did you know about his special bond with Jimmy Durante or his intellectual sparring with Bette Davis? Hit that like button if you enjoyed these heartwarming stories. Subscribe for more classic television history and drop a comment sharing your favorite Carson guest moment.